there's one single Apple product I have to choose, it will always be the Mac. The whole concept and design Apple has done on this computer over the years always fascinated me. But when I think of the MacBook Air, I'm not sure yet, although it could be everything you may need in a laptop. So today I just want to cover some facts on the recently released MacBook Air with the M3 chip. This comes in 4 different colors, 2 screen sizes now, and Apple recommends 3 different spec options on their website with an additional option as usual to bump up the RAM and SSD. They all have an 8-core CPU, but then the GPU gets an optional 10-core and you get 3 different RAM options from 8GB of RAM to 24. I went for the silver 13-inch with the highest CPU and 16GB of RAM, so almost top spec but apart from the RAM, which I kind of regret, but more on that later. Before we move forward, let's back up a bit. So 2 years ago we got the new redesigned MacBook Air with the M2 chip and an optional 15-inch screen, which was a huge success, and I feel like it set the bar for the Mac in a much better place. My experience with older versions of the MacBook Air has always been disappointing. They were slow, batteries were pretty bad, and you couldn't do much on them rather than your daily emails and watching movies. Okay, maybe a bit of editing now and then, but they were struggling with that for sure. In October 2023, Apple announced their new M3 chip, which was an upgrade to their MacBook Pro and iMac lineups, including also the M3 Pro and M3 Max for their MacBook Pros only. Now we've got the exact same baseline M3 chip coming to the MacBook Air, which is the one I've got here. So a fairly boring upgrade we can say, as the only thing we see this year on this model is the CPU, the new anti-fingerprint coating, plus a few minimal upgrades, which I'll talk about. So I went with the silver color as I always do. It's still my favorite after all, and I feel this is the classic color for a Mac. Maybe because this was the main color back in the day, many years ago. But of course it all comes down to preference in the end. It's great to see more color options for sure. So since the release of Apple M1 chip, it looks like we're now getting a new CPU every year. In fact, M4 has just been announced last week on the new Apple event introducing their latest iPads, which I'll be reviewing soon by the way, so definitely subscribe for that. The M4 chip is most likely coming soon on all the Macs as well, but considering the M3 on the MacBook Air has just been released recently, I don't think it will be upgraded anytime soon for this particular machine. And from what we've seen in the past, in case you haven't noticed, Apple is always comparing their latest chip with their second last generation. This is obviously because upgrades on these M processors are not that substantial from one generation to another. I'm actually still using the M1 Max on my daily laptop for heavy projects on the go, and it's still extremely powerful. It never struggles with anything, it still outperforms any of the baseline M chips from M2, M3 and so on. So this new MacBook Air M3 has actually been released just 2 months ago, so still fairly new, and some of you may be thinking for an upgrade, or maybe this might be your first MacBook Air or even your first Mac. The design on this is exactly the same to last year's M2 MacBook Air as we mentioned, and if you have one of these, stick with it, because that's a great laptop too and not too far from what we have now on the M3. They're almost the same. I think now with all these Apple M chips, the time to upgrade increased quite a lot, which is a great thing because they're more powerful, we can use them for a lot longer without losing power and efficiency. I've been using this laptop for the past month just to kind of see where it really stands on the performance, considering this is still a much slower chip overall from the M1 Max I have on my MacBook Pro. But having said that, I've been very impressed with it. It's a lot more powerful than you may think. It definitely feels more like a pro laptop now, at least closer to a pro, whereas before the MacBook Air was known to be the basic computer for your, daily emails and web browsing. So a couple of new things we have on this laptop are of course the new M3 chip, which is a little bit faster now. It has a better power consumption resulting in longer battery life, and this M3 also has the new 3nm chip technology. Basically that means more transistors density, which improves both efficiency and performance. The SSD speed is improved from the M2 MacBook Air as well, which topped out to around 1500 megabytes a second to 2000 megabytes a second. But now the base storage on the M3 MacBook Air uses 2 NAND SSD chips, which almost doubles the performance over what's possible on the M2. This is now increased to around 23 to 2600 megabytes a second read and write speeds. I have the 512 gigabyte storage here on this MacBook Air, and it's averaging around 3000 megabytes a second for both read and write speed, which is more than enough to be honest, but also it's good to know that the higher you get in storage, the faster this will be. The only downside we probably all know is that Apple is charging a lot for the SSD upgrades on any of their computers. This cannot be upgraded in the future to any spec including RAM, so make sure you configure it accordingly when ordering one. The GPU is also upgraded with an optional 10 core now from the base 8 core we previously had on the M2. And we now also have hardware ray tracing if you want to game on your MacBook Air. Or maybe this could be an advantage in Blender or Cinema 4D. Not sure if they support that yet. Opening apps with this M3 is a joy. The waiting time is so short even compared to my Mac Studio. And this is again probably the benefit of the new 3nm technology. So I've put this to some tests with my usual apps and projects. And again, this computer is not really made for this type of work, but I thought why not have a bit of fun with it. In Premiere Pro, this performs pretty well and it handles 4K footage with no problems. However, it shows an obvious thermal throttling here the more you use it. It becomes very slow and hot. Not to mention if you're using an external display, it gets even slower and the left side of the laptop burns. It's definitely fine if you turn down your preview resolution, but the main thing to remember here is that on this Mac you can't do any crazy stuff like graphics or animation. In After Effects, this didn't work for me at all. Even without an external display, my RAM memory was instantly full as soon as I've opened the project. Again, if you have some kind of text animation or basic stuff, this should be fine. DaVinci Resolve actually surprised me, it handled it pretty well. I have some 4K scene here shot with the Apple logo on the iPhone 15 Pro and it plays okay, still at a lower frame rate but enough to do a basic Rec 709 or a few color corrections. But as soon as you add grain or some effects, we see the same thing as in After Effects. The RAM tops up and stops previewing. Final Cut and Logic Pro though work perfectly, again with minimal 4K editing in Final Cut, and I've seen some people use plugins and more here. I'm not a Final Cut user so can't really test that, but I can see this is instantly faster than Premiere Pro importing and scrolling through the footage. In Logic, this handles heavy projects pretty well, so if you're a music producer, buy this Mac with no fear if you're intending to use it for professional use like that. I've got a full song project here with loads of channels and plugins, also some third-party plugins from Isotope, and it never struggles even on the external display. It's a known fact that apps like Logic and Ableton, music production apps in general, rely on CPU more rather than RAM or GPU. Hence we have a much better experience here. This M3 chip is very capable and like we've showed, the way it loads and run apps is very impressive. If only we had a bit more RAM options here, like at least 32 GB, that would have changed everything. And I guess we're back to what we've already mentioned, this Mac is not really intended for professional work. But you can definitely get away with it and do a bit more than just the basics as we had on the previous generations of the MacBook Air. So just to recap, the main differences on this new M3 MacBook from the M2 are a bit more efficiency on the CPU with the new 3nm chip. We now have a 10-core GPU and ray tracing, up to 24 GB of memory, and up to 2 TB of storage with a faster SSD. Which gives us the conclusion that you might want to take a look at the M2 MacBook Air, as those are a lot cheaper now. You will get almost the same computer, and if you're not looking to do any of the things I've just showed, then you can save your money and don't buy the M3. If you do After Effects and editing, you should probably get a Pro instead. But if all you do is web browsing, writing, watching memes, or I don't know, maybe YouTube, or you want to edit your vacation photos and make some reels, buy the M2, it's almost the same computer at a much better price. There's actually plenty of deals online for this now, depending where you're located, but Amazon sells this entry-level M2 now with less than $1,000. So yeah, have a look online, there's plenty of deals. If you want to see more reviews like this, definitely let me know by liking the video or commenting down below. And of course, consider subscribing to the channel as well. I'll be back with more reviews soon. Alright, that's it for now on this computer, and I'll see you guys on the next video.